In today's video, I have 6 beginner-friendly projects you can make using air dry clay. I hope you enjoy. You can find air dry clay at Dollar Tree in a variety of different colors. They are $1.75 each. However, they're only 2 ounces. It's more cost effective if you head over to Hobby Lobby. They have a variety of different air dry clays. For all of the projects you see in today's video, I will be using this Crayola air dry clay. You can get this in a terracotta color as well as white, and I'll be using this whole 2.5 pounds of white. When working with air dry clay, you want to knead the clay for several minutes to remove any air bubbles and create a smooth, workable texture. Then you can use a rolling pin or a glass bottle to roll out your clay. You want it to be at least 1/4 of an inch thick. Anything less than that will be very easy to break once it dries. I like to use paint sticks on each side of my rolling pin as a guide for the thickness of the clay and also to make sure that the thickness is consistent across the entire piece of clay. For this particular project, I will be using a napkin, so pick one with the design of your choice. Make sure to remove the back layers so you're only left with the top layer. Place that on top of your clay with the design side up. Make sure to smooth it out so that all pieces of the napkin have attached to the clay. Then, using a mason jar lid, press firmly so that it goes through the napkin and the clay. Then you can gently tear the napkin away and cut one edge of the clay on the outside of the mason jar lid and peel the remaining clay away. Set that to the side because we can use that in another project. Then you can lift up your mason jar lid. Using something flat and flexible, you can pull your clay up from the surface, smooth it out, and I'm going to set mine down in the bottom of a bowl to create a curved shape, just by pressing it around the edges. You want to allow it time enough to dry at least 24 hours. The longer, the better. Once it is dry, you can take a very fine grit sandpaper to remove the excess napkin. You want to make sure that you wipe every piece of dust off. The napkin did adhere to the clay as it was drying, but I want to make sure to add an extra layer of protection by adding some Mod Podge to the top of the napkin. I like to start in the center and work my way out to the edges. Once the Mod Podge is completely dry, I'm going to take this outside and use a triple thick clear glaze made by Krylon. Lightly spraying over this with 2 coats. This will give it a beautiful shine and also protect the clay. For this clay project, I wanted to create a hand-drawn design. So once I have this rolled out to about 1/4 of an inch thick, I'm going to take a sharp tool and draw out my design. You could use a bobby pin for this or unfold a paper clip. I am just drawing it out at the moment. I'm not cutting it all the way through in case I make a mistake. Then you can come back with a craft knife and cut through where you drew out your design, making sure you go all the way through the clay. Then cut one of those little sections on the outside so you can peel the remaining clay away, and of course save it. We can use that in another project. Now you can smooth out some of the edges that are pretty rough with just a very, very light amount of water. You don't want to put too much water on this because this is a water-based clay. It will kind of get mushy. This is just going to help prevent you from having to do so much sanding once it completely dries. I am going to set mine down inside of a bowl so that I can curve the petals of the flower upward so that as it dries it will have this curved shape. But before it dries, I am going to put some designs in it, and I am just going to poke tiny little holes. I'm not going all the way through the clay. You could use the end of a paintbrush for this, just making some indentations right there in the center. And then again, using something sharp, I'm going to draw lines between each of the petals. You want to make sure that you wipe that clay off each time so that it doesn't clump up when you cut your next piece. Again, I'm not going all the way through it, I'm just making indentations. Once I have that all the way around, I'm going to come back and make that line a little bit longer towards the center. Then I will let mine dry. I actually let mine dry about 3 days, but you want to make sure that it's at least 24 to 48 hours. If you have any rough edges, take a fine grit sandpaper. 220 or above is perfect to smooth those out. I also went on the back side to make sure that that was completely smooth. And again, you want to make sure you remove all of that dust before painting. I'm going to be painting mine a beautiful blue color. This is called Surfboard, and this is just a plain acrylic paint. I'm going to paint the back side first. Once that has dried, I'm going to flip it over and paint the front side. And did you know that you can actually use your hair dryer to help speed up the drying process of the acrylic paint? You just don't want to hold it in one place for very long, just long enough to kind of dry your paint. Once that's dry, I'm going to take some white acrylic paint, and using the same tool that I created those indentations in the middle, I'm going to add that white paint inside of all of those, filling that up in the center. This will add some contrast and really bring out those details. Then I could take a detailed brush and add the white paint into the indentations that I made for each of the petals. Once that is completely dry, I'm going to take a dry brush and a napkin so that once I dab my brush into the paint, I'm going to dab it on the napkin to remove most of it and go around all of the outside edges of the petals. This is really going to create the outline for this. Then I went around the center as well, kind of shading in between the petals in the center, and then added just a little bit of white to each one of the petals by dry brushing that white paint on. Allow that to completely dry, and don't forget to take this outside and use that triple thick clear glaze to seal it. For this project, I wanted to make a piece of wall art. So I'm going to start off with a very large piece of clay, roll that out. Again, get my paint sticks to kind of set it on the side to make sure that it is 1/4 of an inch consistent all the way across. Using a sponge and just a very, very tiny amount of water, I want that surface to be completely smooth on top because I'm using this plastic stencil. I'm just going to line that up, take my rolling pin, and apply even pressure all the way across. I will do that twice just to make sure that it pushed the stencil down into the clay. Then I can lift this straight up, and then using something with a straight edge, I'm going to cut a straight line across the top, the bottom, and then on each side just forming a rectangle around the design that the stencil made. Of course, set that clay to the side. We can use that later on. I'm going to set this on a piece of parchment paper, and I don't want to keep it flat. I actually want to create some curves in this. So I'm going to create a curve at the top just by kind of pushing the top part of that down, and then create a smaller curve at the bottom. Now this will take quite a few days to dry, and you actually want to flip it over about halfway through so that it dries completely. I let mine dry for about 7 days. Now I want to take some fine grit sandpaper and just smooth those edges out, and of course make sure that I remove any dust particles before painting. I'm going to be painting mine with a white chalk paint. You could also use acrylic. Chalk paint and acrylic is perfect to adhere to clay. You want to apply thin coats at a time though. I wanted mine to be a super bright white, but you could paint yours whatever color you like, and I'm going to make sure to paint both sides. I'm also using this wooden plaque from Dollar Tree. It measures about 5 inches by 7 inches, and I added some brown acrylic paint to some water to create a stain. I did not want to use antique wax on this because I know that the clay would not adhere to that, so I'm going to use this watered down mixture, painting all sides, and allow that to thoroughly dry. Before we attach the clay to the front, I want to add a hanger, and I'm using one of these sawtooth hangers. You can find a package of these at like Dollar General. Now we can flip it over and take our clay. We're going to attach this to the front, and you want to use a strong permanent adhesive like this Gorilla Glue or E6000, and only apply it to the areas that are going to be touching the wood plaque. And you don't want to add too much so that it's oozing out. Then you can set this and center it up on your plaque, and to hold it in place until that glue completely cures, I'm going to use some painter's tape to apply in the areas only where the glue is, and then you want to allow that to completely set up, and then you can very gently remove your painter's tape to display your new artwork. For this clay project, I wanted to create an ornament or a bag charm. To get the perfect circle, I'm going to use the rim of a glass and press that all the way through the clay, and then just simply remove the excess clay. Then you can peel that away from the glass, and I'm using this cutout from Dollar Tree to press down into the clay using my roller to create indentations. Then I can very carefully lift this up. And I need to use the end of a paintbrush to create the hole at the top for my ornament. You will have to lift this up to make sure it goes all the way through. Then you want to press it back down flat to make sure that your circle or ornament is flat. And I used a little bit of water to touch up the areas where I put the paintbrush in to make sure that was nice and smooth. I allowed this to dry for 48 hours, and now I'm going over it with a white chalk paint on both sides. Once I have the back completely covered and that paint is dry, I'm going to be adding this napkin design. So I'm going to cut the design out that I want, remove the back layer, add a layer of Mod Podge to the back of the ornament, and then very carefully place my napkin down on top of the wet Mod Podge. You don't want to use a lot of Mod Podge, but you do want an even coat on the back. Make sure you press it firmly and that it has adhered to the entire back. Then we're going to add another layer of Mod Podge on top of the napkin. I like to work from the center outwards. That way, if there's any air, it pushes it to the very edge. Once you have allowed the Mod Podge time enough to dry, take the end of your paintbrush and poke that hole back through the napkin. Then you can take a fine grit sandpaper and gently go around the edges of this to remove the excess napkin, making it nice and smooth. Now for the front. My original idea was to paint the design. However, as it dried, it did shrink a bit, and it was not as a deep of indentation as I would like. So I'm just going to take that cutout piece, paint that in an ocean blue paint, allow that to dry, and then add some super glue to the back so I can glue this on the front. Now all we need to do is add some leather cording for a hanger and tie a knot at the end. This has to be my favorite project in today's video. I found this inspiration from Missy Cake Creations website, and I'll make sure to leave that link in my description box below. First, pinch off a little ball and set that to the side. Take the remainder of the clay and roll it into the form of a log. So it's going to look something like this. Then we're going to flatten out the bottom and kind of make it more narrow at the top and wider at the bottom. We're trying to create something that looks like a paint tube. For the other piece, roll that into a ball. This is going to be the lid for our paint tube. You want to create a small ball, set this on your surface, and press it but not completely flat. Make it look somewhat like a marshmallow. We're going to be placing this at the very top, but to join the two pieces together, you want to make score marks all along the top of what we're going to call the paint tube. Then you'll repeat that process on the bottom of the lid. This is going to help the two pieces join together so that they'll become one piece as it dries. Once you've pressed the two pieces together, just use something to help blend where the two pieces meet, and it kind of blends the clay together. Setting this on a piece of parchment paper because I will leave this on the parchment paper the entire time it dries. Now it's time to create our designs. Using that sharp tool, again, you could use a bobby pin or an unfolded paper clip. Create indentations all along the top to create our lid. Make sure you go from one side to the other, but no need to do it on the back. Then at the very bottom, create a very deep indentation going from one side to the other, but leaving some space at the very bottom. Again, you don't want to go all the way through the clay, because the thinner the clay, the easier it is to break. Then we're going to repeat the same process at the bottom that we did at the top for the lid, making sure we go from one side all the way to the other. Now we're going to take a handle of a paintbrush and we are going to press that down into the body of the clay. We are forming these deep grooves so that when this dries, it can actually hold our paintbrushes. You can make as many grooves as you want. I chose to make 3. Again, you're not going to push it all the way through the clay, but you do want it deep enough to hold your paintbrush. Allow that to completely dry, and because this is a very thick piece of clay, I allowed mine to dry for 7 days. Once dry, this is how it's looking. It's absolutely adorable. I'm going to give mine a base coat of white chalk paint on the entire piece. I'm using a black acrylic paint to paint the lid and making sure that I get down into all of those grooves. I'm also going to paint the back side of it as well as the top. Once you've allowed the black paint to dry, you can pick out whatever color you want. I'm going to be using an absolutely beautiful blue color. This is called Cascade, to paint along the bottom where we made all of those grooves and indentations, going from one side to the other. Then right above where that first groove is for your paintbrush, I'm going to paint that entire section all the way up to the lid. This will take 2 coats because of the color I chose, and I did paint the back side as well and the bottom part of it. So this is what it looks like after 2 coats. Now you can leave it like that, but I'm going to take a detailed brush and just make 3 tiny lines just to create a little flower. You can make as many as you want. You can make them as big as you want. This is what it looks like up close. And I'm going to add this all over the front, adding it into each of the grooves where the paintbrushes will sit, all along the sides. You don't even have to do this, but I think it just adds a beautiful pop of color. Once you've added as many as you want, make sure to allow that acrylic paint to completely dry. And you'll also want to make sure that you seal this piece. I am going to be using that triple thick clear glaze by Krylon and giving this 2 coats. For that last little bit of clay that I had left, I decided I wanted to make a small trinket tray. I'm going to use a mason jar lid to create my circle and then peel away the extra clay. Then you can pop that out of the mason jar lid, set this down in a small bowl, and go around the edges to form those curves. Allow it to completely dry, and then take your sandpaper, and that's what I love about clay. You can sand as much as you want off of it just to make it nice and smooth. Of course, once you wipe it off, it is time to paint it. Now, I wanted to get a little bit colorful with this one, so I am going to start off with my base coat being a beautiful baby pink color, and I made sure to paint the front as well as the back. Once that completely dries, I'm going to take a lavender color as well as a detailed brush and just draw little flower designs. It does not have to be perfect. You can make this a one of a kind. This is how my flowers are looking, and I'm going to do that in different sizes, repeating that design all over the front of this. And don't worry if you make a mistake or you don't like the way it's looking. Once the paint dries, you can always paint over it. Like this particular one, I didn't like the way it looked, so I went over it with some of that pink paint, used my hairdryer to dry it, and then just recreated the design using the lavender. Allow that paint to completely dry, and I decided to take some gold leaf rub and buff just to add a little pop of color around the edges. I'm just going to dab my finger into that and then swipe it all around the edge of this trinket dish. Once that sets up, don't forget to seal it either using some Mod Podge or some triple thick clear glaze. I hope you enjoyed today's projects and found tons of inspiration. If you have a favorite, please let me know in the comment section down below, because I always love to know which one is your favorite. And if you haven't subscribed already, I would love you to click that subscribe button right below the video. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Please take care, and I'll see you guys next time.